Hello. So today we're joined by Bridget McKenzie, founder of Climate Museum UK and co-founder of Culture Declares UK. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hello, hello. Nice to be here.
So Bridget, you've done so much and you continue to kind of be involved in so many different aspects of the climate nature crisis. Did you want to share a little bit more of your journey of how you came to be where you are now?
Mm. Well, my background is in museum and gallery education. I'm a trained teacher, but that was a very long time ago. I grew up very nature conscious and always felt there was a bit of a separation between the path I took, which was arts and culture, and my enduring nature connectedness and also concern for peace as well, environmental and human peace. So it took quite a while before the two things converged again, and they did around 2005 or six when I went freelance. I haven't worked in an institution since then. Um, so I've been doing increasingly more work on sustainable education, writing resources, evaluating heritage, environmental and science education. And so in the last 5 years, I've been dedicated to engaging people with climate and biodiversity with the foundation of those two organisations, Climate Museum UK and Culture Declares Emergency, which is a movement, whereas Climate Museum UK is more of a collective of practitioners, and we do projects together, and it's very much about active learning. So emerging associates, younger people, but also people that are coming from, maybe coming from the arts without an environmental background or vice versa. It provides live projects for people to practice their skills in. And coming together as a collective, we share our knowledge.
There's
So, yeah.
just to pick up on one of the things you've done as well. Like, obviously, was it you were curating objects as well, almost like it, but not in a physical sense, in the sense of having a building and a museum. Did you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so as a collective, we are creating a commons rather than a single collection in one place. Each of us collects our own things in our own way. So, for example, I run workshops where I use collage a lot, and then I get all the participants to put their collages in this growing scrapbook. And I'll just keep create building more and more scrapbooks. I digitize them, so they're a digital collection as well as a growing one. And I also like using handling objects. So uh, we often do think activities where people create eco labels or connected stories with multiple objects. Just to give an example of an object, I have a vinyl record of a song called Living Thing. And it's kind of, and I invite people, it's open questions, what does this mean to you? A song about a living thing, but on a sort of dead, thing made from fossil fuels. So it makes you think about what's alive, what's dead. Anyway, objects can
Yeah.
tell so many stories and they don't have to be precious. I found it in a skip.
Mm, yeah, wow. So another one of the things then you've created is the Earth Crisis Blinkers diagram. And I wondered, would you like to explain a little bit more about
Yeah,
that?
so I do activities that are directly working with public audiences, families, schools, and so on. But I also do a lot of training. So this training is with educators, museum staff, and people doing the same kind of practice as me, peers. And I've found that we often it's possible to waste a lot of time when you're trying to sort of establish what are we talking about together. So this model does actually help us get a wider grasp of the whole Earth crisis, and it also helps us understand about biases and cultural paradigms. So the 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 diagram has four zones, and they are the societal causes of the Earth crisis, the impacts on lives, the planetary boundaries, and then solutions or tactics in a kind of blue zone at the center, which is like blue sky thinking. And the key thing is that there's a person looking at this big sort of overwhelming set of rings, and all they can see, they've got blinkers on, all they can see is a line through that is about climate change and carbon. And that's based on a previous person's model. He's called Jan Konietzko, and that model is called the carbon tunnel vision. But I wanted to categorize it and show a much more comprehensive picture. And I've added, much more to it that really much more overtly includes lots of factors to do with social justice or human justice. And, this is the key to it, really, that the dominant culture or media is minimizing the crisis and making it a technical and an economic issue. And it's also, it's making it more numerical and measurable so that we can get a handle on it. And also a part of that bias is to make it a story of putting shame or pressure on individual people to change their behavior. So that if we remove the blinkers, then we can see so much more about how we need to adapt to emergencies and changes, how we need to think about the intersections between social, human rights and sustainable development goals as well. So it's quite similar in a way to donut economics in that you've got the planetary boundaries in there, as well as those kind of social development aspects. Overall, it's a slightly more complicated model than donut economics. And one of the reasons for that is that donut economics asks the question, how do we meet the needs of humanity within the limits of the planet, within the planetary boundaries? But my model goes further and says, how do we also meet the needs of all other species of life? And what do we do now that those boundaries have been breached on the whole? 6 of the 9 boundaries are significantly breached. So the question, how do we meet needs within the limits of the planet is an old-fashioned question now. So we have to really be seeing the Earth crisis in much more complicating ways.
How do you bring the diagram to life then in your workshops?
Well, I was struggling to bring the diagram to life. I would often just sort of like show it to people and say, oh, it's a bit complicated. You're going to need to take it away and find it online and look at it. But what I've done now is to break it down into those 4 zones so that each one is expanded and explored in turn. The challenge is how to make it accessible.
Yeah.
So for me, the question is to explore in lots of different ways how everything is connected. You could just state everything's connected, and then it just feels like an overwhelming, just an abstract concept of interconnectedness. But we explore different ways that some things are more connected than others. So, some things directly cause other things. Some things have for example, some solutions have knock-on effects that we might not foresee. So if we practice thinking systemically, then we can understand what some of those unforeseen impacts might be. So we practice them in my training. I do an activity where I hand out lots of cards with these cards are about the interventions that we might take to tackle the Earth crisis. So each participant has an intervention card, and then we sort of take turns reading one out, and we have a ball of wool or something like that, and weave connections around the circle. And then other people bid and say, mine is more connected to that. Into this mix, I also have causes. So you might sort of weave between causes and solutions. And the causes are as systemic as I can make them. I've chosen mostly, deeply rooted systemic causes.
Why why do you think models like this are important?
Well, I've developed this over a little while because every time I have a conversation or do a workshop, I just feel the lack of a wider comprehensive understanding. I mean, I'm not saying that being comprehensive is really possible or that I've achieved it, but I just keep aiming for more and more systemic complexity and clarity because really, I think my main motivation is to overcome antagonism.
Mhm.
Because if we waste time trying to define our terms or arguing about our framings without having this kind of meta level understanding of where our different framings come from, um, then, we're just not going to get anywhere. So it's to help conversations move further on, to eliminate shame and blame, to understand how our perspectives are so manipulated and influenced by media and all kinds of subtle messaging. Um, so yeah.
It's interesting because I think so much of what you're saying applies to education and schools in the way that it's often labeled as climate education. It's often done in a very reductionist way, where it's about if we teach young people the facts of the warming that we're experiencing, or these, and then there's some sort of assumption that that will just suddenly lead to an epiphany and it'll all be solved. And without
Mm.
seeing it within this much broader narrative and connecting it, and what really appeals as well as this sense of a systemic thinking as well, I think is really fundamental.
Yeah, and I would add really the key principle of Climate Museum UK, which is about being positopian, and there's quite a lot of complexity in that, but it comes down to needing to face the hard stuff, all of these complexities of the Earth crisis, and to do that with, as at an early stage as possible with young people, but sensitively, and to combine that with imagining the best that we can possibly be. It's about widening our consideration of all the possibilities, and young people are great at that, you know. So, we need young people to be learning not just about climate, not just with these blinkers on.
It feels
Um,
like we've
yeah.
stumbled across this. The last question I was going to ask is, do you have one piece of advice for educators? And what you've just said that sounds like something that would be really good advice. I don't know if you wanted to sort of reframe it or say it again. That
Well, so one thing that I always say, I often see this question, how can we talk to children and young people about this crisis? And I say, don't talk to, talk with. And, you know, don't burden children with being the eco educators and the warriors, but enable them to ask questions and integrate. I come from arts, integrate the arts and the imagination into this subject because it's so complicated, so emotional, so important that creativity is not like a little sidestep. It's actually a route to being able to expand and to express emotions and to really have deep deep conversations.
yeah, that sounds really really good. Well, thank you so much, Bridget. Um, yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.